The text message arrived exactly 7 minutes before Damien Westfield was supposed to become a husband, and 30 seconds before his entire world collapsed in front of 300 witnesses. The cathedral was perfect. Too perfect. Afternoon sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting the white marble floors in shades of amber and crimson. The scent of white roses hung thick in the air, thousands of them cascading from every column and archway. The organ hummed softly, filling the vaulted space with the kind of music that promised forever. 300 guests sat in polished oak pews, silk and taffeta rustling as they turned to whisper to one another, their voices a low murmur of anticipation. At exactly 2:53 p.m., 7 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Damien Westfield stood at the altar in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his hands clasped behind his back, and felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He shouldn't have looked. Protocol dictated that the groom never checks his phone at the altar. But something in that vibration felt wrong. Urgent. Final. His fingers found the device, and he angled it just slightly, enough to see the screen without the priest noticing. The message was from Vanessa, his bride, the woman who should have been in the bridal suite at this very moment, adjusting her veil, preparing to walk down that aisle toward him. For words on the screen. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Time stopped. The organ music became distant, warped, like he was hearing it from underwater. The faces in the crowd blurred into an incomprehensible smear of color and expectation. His heart slammed against his ribcage, so hard he thought it might crack through bone. The phone trembled in his hand, and he read the message again, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't change. She wasn't coming. Vanessa Sterling, Manhattan socialite, the woman his mother had called perfect, and his grandmother had called ambitious. The woman whose face had been on the cover of 3 bridal magazines this month alone, she wasn't coming. His throat closed. Sweat bloomed cold along his collar despite the cathedral's careful climate control. His best man, Carter, stepped closer, concern creasing his forehead. "Damien? You okay, man?" But Damien couldn't answer. He couldn't breathe. He could only stare at that screen, at those devastating words, while 300 people watched and waited for a bride who would never arrive. The whispers started like a wind through dry grass. Subtle at first, then building. Someone in the 3rd row leaned toward their companion. A phone came out. Then another. "Where's the bride?" The question floated from somewhere in the middle pews, loud enough to carry. Photographers hired to capture this moment of joy adjusted their lenses, sensing a different kind of story unfolding. Damien's mother, seated in the front row in her dove-gray Chanel suit, went pale as alabaster. Her hand flew to her throat, fingers clutching at her pearl necklace. Across the aisle, he could see Marcus Pemberton, his chief business rival, lean back in his seat with the beginning of a smirk playing at his lips. The murmuring grew louder, a wave of speculation and shock rolling through the assembled crowd. "She's late. Something's wrong. Is he sweating? Look at his face. Oh God, this is happening." The clicking of phone cameras became audible. 300 witnesses, and most of them were now documenting his humiliation in real time. "She's not coming." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Everyone's going to know. The board members in attendance, the investors, the journalists, his family. They were all watching him stand here like a fool, waiting for a woman who had just destroyed him via text message. His legs began to move without conscious thought, carrying him toward the side exit. He had to get out, had to escape before he completely fell apart in front of everyone who mattered in his world. His vision tunneled. The door. Just make it to the door. "Mr. Westfield, wait. Don't leave like this." The voice cut through the chaos in his head like a blade through silk. Clear. Steady. Familiar. Damien's feet stopped moving, though he wasn't sure he'd commanded them to. He turned, disoriented, and saw her. Iris Calloway, his secretary. She'd been seated near the back with the rest of the staff, wearing a simple navy dress that he'd barely registered when he'd seen her earlier. But she wasn't sitting anymore. She was standing, and every eye in the cathedral had shifted from him to her. The organ music faltered and died. In the sudden silence, her footsteps on the marble floor sounded impossibly loud. 1 step. 2. She was walking up the aisle. Toward him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones pivoted, refocusing, recording this new and unexpected development. What is she doing? Who is that? Is this part of a ceremony? The questions buzzed like insects, but Iris didn't hesitate. She moved with purpose, her shoulders back, her chin raised. She reached up and removed her glasses with one fluid motion, tucking them into her pocket, and Damien found himself staring at her with an intensity he'd never felt before. Had her eyes always been that shade of hazel? Had they always held that much fire? She climbed the 3 steps to the altar, and the entire cathedral held its breath. She looked at him with eyes he'd never really seen before, and said 5 words that would change everything. I'm not going to let them. 300 people witnessed what happened next, and the footage went viral within hours. But here's the thing. If you're watching this, and you haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller yet, you're basically telling me you enjoy missing the most dramatic moments in storytelling. And if that's you, head to the comments right now and tell me why you're choosing to miss out. I need to understand this. Meanwhile, everyone who has subscribed knows exactly what Iris did next. Let them what? The question hung in the air for exactly 2 seconds before Iris turned to face the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto this woman in the simple navy dress, this secretary who had just walked up to the altar where a bride should have been standing. Damien stared at her, his mouth opening to speak, to ask what she was doing, but no sound came out. His mind was still stuck on that text message, still reeling from the humiliation, still trying to process the fact that Vanessa had abandoned him in the most public way possible. But Iris wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at them, at the crowd of Manhattan's elite, their phones raised, their faces hungry for scandal, for a story they could dissect over champagne later. At the photographers whose cameras were clicking like locusts, at his mother, still pale and clutching her pearls, at the board members and investors and rivals who would use this moment to question his judgment, his leadership, his worth. Iris's voice rang out clear and steady, filling the cathedral with an authority that no one expected from a secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today to celebrate what we all hoped would be a joyous occasion. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond anyone's control, the ceremony will not be taking place as scheduled. Her tone was professional, almost businesslike, as if she were addressing a board meeting rather than a cathedral full of shocked wedding guests. However, the reception venue is fully prepared, and we invite you all to join us there. The food, the music, and the celebration of life and love will continue. Please make your way to the grand ballroom at the plaza. Transportation is waiting outside. She paused, and her eyes swept across the crowd with a look that dared anyone to argue. We appreciate your understanding and discretion during this private matter. The audacity of it hit Damien like a freight train. She was redirecting them, salvaging something from this disaster, giving him a way out that didn't involve him fleeing like a wounded animal. But more than that, she was protecting him. The crowd hesitated, uncertain, looking to one another for guidance. A few people stood, then a few more. The spell was breaking. They were actually listening to her. His mother rose from her seat, tears streaming down her face, and nodded to Iris with something that looked almost like gratitude before turning to leave. Carter, his best man, squeezed Damien's shoulder and whispered, "I'll handle the crowd." "Go!" The guests began filing out, their voices rising again, but now directed toward logistics rather than gossip. "Where's the plaza again? Should we still give gifts? Did anyone see this coming?" The photographers kept snapping photos, but Iris positioned herself between them and Damien, blocking their clear shots of his face. When the cathedral had mostly emptied, when only stragglers remained gathering their things and whispering in corners, Iris finally turned back to Damien. He was still standing there, frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with everything that had just happened. She reached out and gently took his arm, her touch grounding him back in his body, in this moment. "We need to get you out of here," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice that was different from the commanding tone she'd used with the crowd. This was softer, personal. "There's a side entrance through the vestry. My car's parked 2 blocks away. Can you walk?" He nodded, unable to form words. She guided him down from the altar, through a small door he'd barely noticed during the rehearsal, down a narrow corridor that smelled of old wood and candle wax. His feet moved automatically, following her lead, trusting her in a way he couldn't quite explain. They emerged into late afternoon sunlight, the city noise hitting them like a wall after the cathedral's reverent silence. Iris didn't let go of his arm as she navigated them through side streets, away from the front entrance, where news vans were probably already gathering. Her car was a practical sedan, nothing like the fleet of luxury vehicles he was accustomed to, and somehow that felt right in this moment. She opened the passenger door and waited while he folded himself into the seat. When she slid behind the wheel and started the engine, he finally found his voice. "What did you just do?" It came out rough, almost angry, though he wasn't sure if the anger was directed at her, at Vanessa, or at himself. Iris pulled into traffic before answering, her eyes on the road, her hands steady on the wheel. "I stopped them from turning your worst day into their entertainment," she said simply. "You can fire me tomorrow if you want. But today, I'm getting you somewhere safe." Fire her? The thought hadn't even crossed his mind. He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, and for the first time since that text message arrived, he felt like he could breathe. Somewhere in the back of his consciousness, a question was forming. A dangerous question. How long had she been protecting him like this? 2 years, actually. 2 years before this moment, before the cathedral and the text message and the 300 witnesses, Iris Calloway had walked into his life for the first time. And if Damien had been paying attention, if he hadn't been so consumed by his own world, he might have realized that this woman had been saving him all along. But he wasn't paying attention. Not yet. He was too busy building an empire and ignoring everything else that mattered. So let me get this straight. You're watching a woman fall for her boss while planning his wedding to someone else, and you still haven't hit subscribe? That's actually impressive levels of self-sabotage. Listen, if you're not subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, you're missing stories like this 3 times a week. Go ahead and comment below explaining your reasoning. I'll wait. But those of you who are subscribed, you already know this gets so much worse before it gets better. 2 years before the cathedral, Iris Calloway had walked into Westfield Industries with a freshly printed MBA degree, $83,000 in student debt, and absolutely no safety net. She was 26 years old. She'd left her small hometown in Ohio with nothing but ambition and terror, and she needed this job the way drowning people need air. The executive floor of Westfield Industries smelled like new carpet and expensive coffee, and the sound of keyboards clicking echoed off marble floors while floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Manhattan that made her dizzy. She'd never been in a building this tall, never worn heels this uncomfortable, never wanted anything as desperately as she wanted to prove she belonged here. Damien Westfield barely looked up when she entered his office for the interview. He was 33 then, already infamous in business circles for his ruthless efficiency and his habit of cycling through assistants like disposable razors. He sat behind a desk that probably cost more than her entire college education, his dark hair showing just hints of gray at the temples, his blue eyes scanning a quarterly report with a kind of intensity that made grown men nervous. "Iris Calloway," he said, not as a greeting but as a confirmation that she existed. "Your resume says you have an MBA from a state school and 3 years of administrative experience. Why should I hire you over the 15 other candidates who went to better schools?" She should have been intimidated. She was intimidated, but she'd also spent the last 48 hours memorizing everything she could find about Westfield Industries, and she'd noticed something in the very report he was reading. "Because I would have caught the error on page 7 before it went to the board," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked up then, really looked at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. "What error?" She pointed to the 3rd column of figures, the projection for Q3 manufacturing costs. Someone transposed 2 digits. "It's off by $12 million. He stared at the page, then at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but interest. She got the job. She started the next Monday, and within a week she understood why assistants didn't last. Damien Westfield worked 16-hour days, skipped meals, drank coffee like it was oxygen, and expected everyone around him to operate at the same inhuman pace. But Iris was good at patterns. She learned that he needed his coffee black at 6 a.m., but with cream at 2 p.m., that he forgot to eat unless food appeared in front of him, that he ignored his own health, but never missed his grandmother's birthday. She started anticipating his needs before he voiced them, managing the chaos that swirled around him, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she became indispensable. 6 months into the job, they were working late on a major merger, the office empty except for them and the cleaning crew. Damien leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, and said something he'd never said before. "My grandmother keeps telling me I'm married to the company. Maybe she's right. My mother wants me settled down, producing heirs, maintaining the dynasty. But how do you build a marriage when you barely have time to sleep?" Iris made him tea instead of coffee that night, sat across from him in the dim office, and didn't offer empty platitudes about work-life balance. She just listened, and in that moment, watching him be vulnerable and human instead of a corporate titan everyone else saw, she realized something terrifying. She was starting to care about him as more than just her boss. But caring didn't matter, because 6 months after that late-night conversation, Damien met Vanessa Sterling at a charity gala. Vanessa was everything Iris wasn't. Wealthy, connected, beautiful in the way that came from good genes and better plastic surgeons, and exactly what the Westfield family wanted for their heir. The courtship was fast, strategic, and painfully public. Their relationship played out in tabloid headlines and society page photographs. And Iris's job evolved into something that felt like torture. She scheduled their dinner reservations. She bought Vanessa's birthday gifts, anniversary presents, apology flowers. She watched from the sidelines as Damien fell for a woman who seemed perfect on paper, and she felt a strange tightness in her chest every time he mentioned Vanessa's name. 3 months into their relationship, Damien called Iris into his office and announced his engagement. "I'm going to need your help planning the wedding," he said, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Vanessa has a lot of ideas, but I don't have time to execute them. You're good at this kind of thing." And just like that, Iris became responsible for planning the wedding that would break her heart. "Okay, I'm genuinely confused now. You're watching Iris protect a man who doesn't even know she exists romantically, and you're still not subscribed? Like, are you okay? Are you allergic to amazing storytelling? Head to the comments and tell me what's stopping you. For everyone else who's already subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, you know exactly what kind of chaos is about to unfold. 5 months before the wedding, Iris found herself in the 7th bridal boutique of the week, watching Vanessa Sterling snap her fingers at a seamstress who was literally on her knees pinning a hem. "This is unacceptable," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I specifically said I wanted French lace, not this cheap imitation. Do you even know who I'm marrying?" The seamstress's face flushed red, and Iris felt her stomach twist. This was the real Vanessa, the one who emerged when Damien wasn't around to witness it. The one who was rude to waiters and dismissive of vendors and obsessed with price tags in a way that didn't match her supposed old money pedigree. Iris had accompanied Vanessa to dozens of appointments over the past months because Damien was too busy with the company expansion, and with each appointment, her unease grew. But it was the phone calls that really caught her attention. Every time a specific number called, Vanessa's entire demeanor changed. Her voice would soften, become almost intimate, and she'd excuse herself with a quick, "I need to take this," before stepping away. The name on her screen was always the same, Julian. Iris started noticing other things, too. Inconsistencies. Vanessa would mention having lunch with her mother, but Iris had seen the calendar and knew her mother was in the Hamptons that day. She'd talk about a charity event she'd attended, but the details wouldn't match what Iris had read in the society pages. Small things, easily explainable things. Except they kept piling up, and Iris's professional instincts, honed by 2 years of managing Damien's complex schedule, were screaming that something was wrong. She started keeping notes, private notes on her personal laptop, documenting the discrepancies, the mysterious calls, the times when Vanessa's stories didn't align. She told herself she was being paranoid, that she was looking for problems because she didn't want this wedding to happen, but deep down she knew it was more than that. She was witnessing something wrong, and she had no idea what to do about it. The worst part was when Damien asked her opinion. It was late, they were working through a merger agreement, and he'd just gotten off the phone with Vanessa. "You spend more time with her than I do lately," he said, his voice carrying a note of guilt. "What do you think of her?" "Really?" Iris's hands froze over her keyboard. This was her chance. She could tell him about the phone calls, the inconsistencies, the way Vanessa treated people when he wasn't looking. But what proof did she have? Suspicions and circumstantial observations. What if she was wrong? What if she destroyed his happiness over nothing more than her own jealousy? Because that's what he'd think. That's what anyone would think. The secretary in love with her boss, trying to sabotage his relationship. She's very organized, Iris said carefully, hating herself with every word. She knows what she wants. Your family seems pleased. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either, and the diplomatic non-answer made her feel sick. That night, working alone in the office after Damien had finally gone home, Iris realized something that terrified her. She was deeply, irrevocably in love with him. Not the crush she'd been pretending it was, not the admiration she tried to rationalize it as, but actual love. The kind that made her chest ache when he smiled at Vanessa's name. The kind that made her memorize how he took his coffee and what made him laugh, and the exact shade of exhaustion in his eyes when he'd worked too long. And there was absolutely no future in it. He was getting married in 5 months to a woman who might be deceiving him, and Iris was just the secretary who bought the engagement ring and scheduled the cake tastings, and slowly broke her own heart one wedding detail at a time. 2 months before the wedding, everything changed. Iris was at the venue doing a final walkthrough when she realized she'd left her phone in the bridal suite. When she went back to retrieve it, she heard Vanessa's voice through the partially open door. "Julian, darling, just a few more months. Once I'm Mrs. Westfield, we'll have everything we need. The prenup isn't perfect, but divorce in New York is very favorable to wives, especially when we can prove he prioritized work over the marriage." Iris stood frozen in the hallway, her heart hammering so hard she thought Vanessa might hear it. "I know, baby, I miss you too. But this is the plan. We stick to the plan. His grandmother suspects something, but the old woman can't prove anything. And that secretary of his is so pathetically professional, she'd never dream of interfering." Iris pulled out her phone with shaking hands and started recording, capturing every damning word. When Vanessa finally hung up and left the suite, Iris slipped in and saw Vanessa's phone on the counter, unlocked, text messages to Julian visible. She photographed everything, her hands trembling so badly she had to take each shot twice. This time, she would tell him. Evidence or no evidence, suspicions or proof, she would tell him and let him decide what to do with the information. She stayed late the next evening, waiting until the office emptied, rehearsing what she'd say. But before she could start, Vanessa swept in unannounced, all performative affection and strategic kisses, announcing that her parents were arriving early for the wedding festivities. Damien looked exhausted but pleased, and Iris watched the moment slip away. Later that night, alone in her apartment, she stared at the evidence on her phone and did something she would regret for the rest of her life. She deleted it, convinced herself she was imagining things, that she was seeing conspiracies where none existed, that her feelings were clouding her judgment. But Eleanor Westfield, Damien's grandmother, saw everything Iris was trying to hide. The next day, Eleanor approached her in the hallway outside Damien's office, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You're in love with my grandson, aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. Iris opened her mouth to deny it, but Eleanor held up a hand. "Don't bother lying, dear. I've been watching people for 78 years. I know what love looks like, and I know what deception looks like." She paused, and her expression turned grave. "I also know what Vanessa Sterling is. The question is, are you going to let him make the biggest mistake of his life, or are you going to fight for him? So we're back where we started, except now you understand exactly what Iris is risking. And if you're still watching without subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller, I have questions. Serious questions. Drop a comment explaining your thought process, because I genuinely want to understand. Meanwhile, subscribers already know what bold move Iris makes next, and trust me, it's about to get wild. Eleanor's question hung in the air like a challenge, and Iris spent the next week trying to answer it. 7 days before the wedding, with the rehearsal dinner looming and final preparations consuming every waking hour, Iris made a decision. She would investigate one more time. Properly this time. Eleanor had offered to help, had even suggested hiring a private investigator, but Iris knew that if she was going to present evidence to Damien, it had to come from her. It had to be irrefutable. So she did something she never thought herself capable of. She followed Vanessa Sterling through the streets of Manhattan like a character in a spy novel, feeling ridiculous and determined in equal measure. Vanessa's behavior had become increasingly erratic in recent days, more mysterious phone calls, more unexplained absences, and Iris had a terrible feeling that whatever was happening was accelerating towards some kind of conclusion. On a Thursday afternoon, Iris watched Vanessa enter the Mandarin Oriental, one of Manhattan's most exclusive hotels. She waited 10 minutes, then followed, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The lobby was opulent, all marble and gold leaf, and Iris felt completely out of place in her practical work clothes. She found a corner with a view of the elevators and waited, pretending to check her phone. 20 minutes later, Vanessa emerged from an elevator with a man Iris didn't recognize. He was handsome in an arrogant way, expensive suit, designer watch, the kind of man who looked like he'd never worked an honest day in his life. And he had his arm around Vanessa's waist with the casual intimacy of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. They moved toward the hotel bar, and Iris followed at a distance, positioning herself where she could see through the glass walls. What she witnessed made her stomach turn. Vanessa and this man, Julian she presumed, sitting close together, kissing in a way that was definitely not friendly, discussing something with intense focus. Iris pulled out her phone with shaking hands and started taking photos, zooming in as much as her camera would allow, capturing every angle, every gesture, every piece of evidence that Vanessa Sterling was cheating on Damien Westfield days before their wedding. 3 days before the ceremony, Iris requested a private meeting with Damien. She'd barely slept, had rehearsed what she'd say 100 times, had the photos organized on her phone ready to show him. When she walked into his office and closed the door, he looked up with mild concern. "Is everything okay with the wedding preparations?" She sat down without being invited, her hands clasped tight to keep them from trembling. "I need to show you something," she said, and she pulled out her phone and handed it to him. "I followed Vanessa yesterday. These photos are from the Mandarin Oriental. That's her with a man named Julian. They were kissing, Damien. They were discussing their plans for after the wedding." She watched his face as he scrolled through the images, watched the confusion turn to disbelief, and then watched something she never expected. Anger. But not at Vanessa. At her. "This is what you're bringing me." His voice was ice cold, and Iris felt her heart sink. Photos of Vanessa talking to a colleague? This could be anyone. This could be completely innocent. She tried to explain about the phone calls, the inconsistencies, everything she'd observed over the past months, but he cut her off. "You're jealous," he said, and the words hit like a physical blow. "This is completely unprofessional. I thought better of you, Iris. I trusted you." She opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain that she was trying to protect him, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He'd already decided, already convinced himself that she was sabotaging his happiness out of petty jealousy. "Take the rest of the week off," he said, his tone final. "I'll see you at the wedding. If you still have a job after this, we'll discuss your future with the company then." Iris went home and cried harder than she'd cried since leaving Ohio. She'd done the right thing. She knew she had, but it didn't matter because Damien didn't believe her. Worse, he thought she was vindictive and jealous and unprofessional. Everything she'd built over 2 years, gone in one conversation. That evening, Eleanor called. "I heard what happened," the older woman said gently. "I'm so sorry I put you in that position, dear. But you did the right thing." Iris wanted to believe her, but it didn't feel right. It felt like the end of everything. "Some people need to learn their lessons the hard way," Eleanor continued. "My grandson is brilliant in business, but blind when it comes to matters of the heart. He'll see the truth eventually. The question is whether you'll still be there when he does." Iris spent the weekend writing a resignation letter, planning to submit it after the ceremony, planning to walk away from Damien Westfield and the life she built around him. Wedding day morning arrived like an execution date. Iris got to the cathedral early, determined to ensure every detail was perfect one last time, determined to be professional until the very end. But Vanessa was late, 30 minutes late, then an hour, and the wedding coordinator was frantic. Iris tried calling, texting, but got no response. Guests were arriving, taking their seats, whispering about the delay. And then Iris saw it happen. Saw Damien pull out his phone at the altar, saw his face change, saw his entire world collapse in real time. She was watching from her seat near the back with the other staff members when everything inside her screamed that she had to do something. She couldn't let 300 people turn his worst moment into their entertainment. She couldn't let him flee in humiliation when she absolutely knew, that none of this was his fault. So Iris Calloway stood up, removed her glasses, and walked up that aisle to save the man she loved, even though he'd just broken her heart 3 days earlier. Let me guess. You're one of those people who watches entire series without subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller. That's like going to someone's house for dinner every week and never saying thank you. If that's you, comment below and tell me your justification. I'm collecting data. But for my subscribers, you already know this is just the beginning of Damien and Iris's story. The morning after the cathedral disaster, Iris woke up at Eleanor's estate to the sound of her phone exploding with notifications. The media had turned the wedding scandal into a feeding frenzy, and Vanessa Sterling had released a statement that was already trending across every social platform. After much soul-searching, the statement read, I realized I couldn't marry someone who prioritized his business empire over building a life together. I deserve a partner who will be present, not a man married to his company. I hope Damien finds what he's looking for, but I couldn't sacrifice my happiness waiting for him to make me a priority. The spin was masterful, Iris had to admit. Vanessa had positioned herself as the victim, the woman who'd walked away from billions because love mattered more than money. Public opinion split immediately. Some people sympathized with Damien, calling Vanessa cruel for the last-minute abandonment. Others mocked him, sharing memes about workaholics who couldn't keep a woman, billionaires who thought money could buy love. But the real damage was happening in the business world. Major investors were calling emergency meetings, questioning Damien's judgment and stability. Competitors were circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. And Iris, from her makeshift command center in Eleanor's library, was managing the entire crisis while Damien sat in stunned silence 2 rooms away. Eleanor had hired a private detective within hours of the cathedral incident, and by the second day, the results started coming in. Vanessa Sterling and Julian Hargrove had been together for 3 years. 3 years. They had a pattern, a system, targeting wealthy men with family pressure to marry. Vanessa would infiltrate their social circles, become exactly what their families wanted, push for a fast engagement, and then either marry and divorce for a settlement or, if the prenup was too tight, stage a dramatic exit that left her reputation intact. The detective found bank statements showing regular wire transfers from Julian to Vanessa, love letters dating back years, emails discussing the Westfield project like it was a corporate merger instead of a relationship. She played Damien perfectly, and she'd almost gotten away with it. When Iris showed him the evidence, Damien's face went through a series of expressions she'd never seen before. Rage, white-hot and terrifying. Then something worse. A hollow numbness that scared her more than the anger had. But there was no time to process trauma because they had a legal offensive to mount and a company to protect. Damien's lawyers descended on Eleanor's estate like an army, preparing cases for fraud and defamation. The prenup would have protected most of his assets, but the scandal itself was damaging enough without the added insult of Vanessa profiting from her deception. And through it all, Iris was there, organizing evidence into coherent timelines, coordinating between the legal team and the PR consultants, handling communications with the board, fielding media requests. She worked 18-hour days from Eleanor's library, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, and Damien found himself watching her with new eyes. He'd always known she was competent, but he'd never truly seen the full scope of her capabilities. She anticipated problems before they emerged, managed crises with calm efficiency, and somehow kept the entire operation running smoothly while he fell apart. He caught her at 2 a.m, stress-eating crackers over the kitchen sink, her hair escaping its usually neat bun, exhaustion written across her face. And she wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about him. 4 days after the wedding that never was, Damien insisted on returning to the office. The board had called an emergency meeting, and he knew he had to face them. Iris accompanied him, taking her usual seat against the wall with her tablet, ready to take notes. But when the questions turned hostile, when board member after board member questioned his judgment and his fitness to lead, Iris did something unexpected. She stood up, pulled up a presentation on the main screen, and systematically demonstrated how the company's performance had remained strong throughout the entire engagement period. Revenue was up. The merger had closed successfully. Every metric that mattered showed that Damien's personal life had never interfered with his professional excellence. Mr. Westfield was deceived by a professional con artist, she said, her voice steady and authoritative. That speaks to her skill, not his incompetence. And I would suggest that any board member who hasn't been fooled at least once in their personal life throw the first stone. The room fell silent, and Damien stared at her with something that felt dangerously close to awe. That evening, back in the familiar space of his office with just the two of them and the city lights stretching out beyond the windows, Damien finally asked the question that had been eating at him. Why did you do it? Walk up that aisle in front of everyone. Iris looked up from her laptop, and for a moment she considered giving him a professional answer, something about damage control and corporate reputation. But she was too tired for lies. Because I couldn't watch them humiliate you, she said simply. You deserved better than to be abandoned like that. You deserve someone to stand with you. He studied her then, really looked at her in a way he never had before. Her hazel eyes that carried more strength than he'd ever noticed. The quiet determination in the set of her jaw. The unwavering loyalty that had kept her by his side through 2 years of chaos and crisis, and now this ultimate disaster. His hand moved toward hers across the desk, and for one electric moment, everything hung in the balance. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment, and when he looked at the screen, his face went dark. Vanessa had released another statement, this time an interview with a major news outlet, claiming that Damien's secretary had been in love with him all along, that Iris had manipulated the situation and stolen her fiancé. The internet erupted, and within an hour, Iris Calloway's face was plastered across social media with labels like homewrecker, gold digger, and scheming secretary trending alongside her name. So Iris saved him from humiliation, and now she's being dragged through the mud. And you're watching this without subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller because... Go ahead, I'll wait. Drop your excuse in the comments. But my subscribers don't need excuses. They're already here for every twist and turn. The morning after the cathedral disaster, Iris woke up at Eleanor's estate to the sound of her phone exploding with notifications. The media had turned the wedding scandal into a feeding frenzy, and Vanessa Sterling had released a statement that was already trending across every social platform. After much soul-searching, the statement read, I realized I couldn't marry someone who prioritized his business empire over building a life together. I deserve a partner who will be present, not a man married to his company. I hope Damien finds what he's looking for, but I couldn't sacrifice my happiness waiting for him to make me a priority. The spin was masterful, Iris had to admit. Vanessa had positioned herself as the victim, the woman who'd walked away from billions because love mattered more than money. Public opinion split immediately. Some people sympathized with Damien, calling Vanessa cruel for the last-minute abandonment. Others mocked him, sharing memes about workaholics who couldn't keep a woman, billionaires who thought money could buy love. But the real damage was happening in the business world. Major investors were calling emergency meetings, questioning Damien's judgment and stability. Competitors were circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. And Iris, from her makeshift command center in Eleanor's library, was managing the entire crisis while Damien sat in stunned silence 2 rooms away. Eleanor had hired a private detective within hours of the cathedral incident, and by the 2nd day, the results started coming in. Vanessa Sterling and Julian Hargrove had been together for 3 years. 3 years. They had a pattern, a system, targeting wealthy men with family pressure to marry. Vanessa would infiltrate their social circles, become exactly what their families wanted, push for a fast engagement, and then either marry and divorce for a settlement or, if the prenup was too tight, stage a dramatic exit that left her reputation intact. The detective found bank statements showing regular wire transfers from Julian to Vanessa, love letters dating back years, emails discussing the Westfield project like it was a corporate merger instead of a relationship. She played Damien perfectly, and she'd almost gotten away with it. When Iris showed him the evidence, Damien's face went through a series of expressions she'd never seen before. Rage, white-hot and terrifying. Then something worse. A hollow numbness that scared her more than the anger had. But there was no time to process trauma, because they had a legal offensive to mount and a company to protect. Damien's lawyers descended on Eleanor's estate like an army, preparing cases for fraud and defamation. The prenup would have protected most of his assets, but the scandal itself was damaging enough without the added insult of Vanessa profiting from her deception. And through it all, Iris was there, organizing evidence into coherent timelines, coordinating between the legal team and the PR consultants, handling communications with the board, fielding media requests. She worked 18-hour days from Eleanor's library, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, and Damien found himself watching her with new eyes. He'd always known she was competent, but he'd never truly seen the full scope of her capabilities. She anticipated problems before they emerged, managed crises with calm efficiency, and somehow kept the entire operation running smoothly while he fell apart. He caught her at 2 a.m, stress-eating crackers over the kitchen sink, her hair escaping its usually neat bun, exhaustion written across her face. And she wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about him. 4 days after the wedding that never was, Damien insisted on returning to the office. The board had called an emergency meeting, and he knew he had to face them. Iris accompanied him, taking her usual seat against the wall with her tablet, ready to take notes. But when the questions turned hostile, when board member after board member questioned his judgment and his fitness to lead, Iris did something unexpected. She stood up, pulled up a presentation on the main screen, and systematically demonstrated how the company's performance had remained strong throughout the entire engagement period. Revenue was up. The merger had closed successfully. Every metric that mattered showed that Damien's personal life had never interfered with his professional excellence. Mr. Westfield was deceived by a professional con artist, she said, her voice steady and authoritative. That speaks to her skill, not his incompetence. And I would suggest that any board member who hasn't been fooled at least once in their personal life throw the first stone. The room fell silent, and Damien stared at her with something that felt dangerously close to awe. That evening, back in the familiar space of his office with just the two of them and the city lights stretching out beyond the windows, Damien finally asked the question that had been eating at him. Why did you do it? Walk up that aisle in front of everyone. Iris looked up from her laptop, and for a moment she considered giving him a professional answer, something about damage control and corporate reputation. But she was too tired for lies. Because I couldn't watch them humiliate you, she said simply. You deserved better than to be abandoned like that. You deserved someone to stand with you. He studied her then, really looked at her in a way he never had before. Her hazel eyes that carried more strength than he'd ever noticed. The quiet determination in the set of her jaw. The unwavering loyalty that had kept her by his side through 2 years of chaos and crisis, and now this ultimate disaster. His hand moved toward hers across the desk, and for one electric moment, everything hung in the balance. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment, and when he looked at the screen, his face went dark. Vanessa had released another statement, this time an interview with a major news outlet, claiming that Damien's secretary had been in love with him all along, that Iris had manipulated the situation and stolen her fiancé. The internet erupted, and within an hour, Iris Calloway's face was plastered across social media with labels like homewrecker, gold digger, and scheming secretary trending alongside her name. So Iris saved him from humiliation, and now she's being dragged through the mud. And you're watching this without subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller because... Go ahead, I'll wait. Drop your excuse in the comments. But my subscribers don't need excuses. They're already here for every twist and turn. The job offer sat on Iris's desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. Vice President of Operations at Hartley Consulting Group, one of the most prestigious firms in Manhattan. Double her current salary. A corner office. A team of her own. Everything she'd worked toward since leaving Ohio with nothing but ambition and student debt. It was the smart move, the professional move, the move that would protect both her and Damien from the impossible situation they'd stumbled into. But when she looked at that offer letter, all she could feel was the sharp ache of loss. Because taking this job meant leaving him, and leaving him felt like tearing out a piece of her own heart. She thought about it for 3 days, barely sleeping, running the same arguments through her mind on an endless loop. Stay and torture yourself daily with a love that can't be reciprocated. Leave and build the career you've always dreamed of. Stay and risk eventually resenting him. Leave, and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. Eleanor found her in the estate library at 2 a.m, staring at the offer letter like it might provide answers. Running doesn't solve anything, dear, the older woman said gently. But neither does staying somewhere that breaks your heart every day. Iris looked up with tears in her eyes. I don't know what to do. Eleanor sat beside her and took her hand. Yes, you do. You've always known. The question is whether you're brave enough to do it. The decision was made for her when Damien discovered the offer letter on her desk. She'd been in a meeting, and when she returned, he was standing by her workspace, the paper in his hands, his face completely drained of color. You're leaving. It wasn't really a question. More like an accusation wrapped in devastation. Iris closed the office door behind them, suddenly aware of how many eyes were watching. I was going to tell you, she said quietly. I just hadn't figured out how. He set the letter down carefully, like it might shatter. Are you leaving because of me? Because of what I said the other night. She could have lied, could have blamed it on career advancement or new opportunities or any of a dozen professional reasons. But she was tired of lying. I'm leaving because staying is too hard, she said, and watched something crack in his expression. Every day I watch you and know I can't have you. Every day I feel things I have no right to feel. This job is a gift, Damien. It's a chance to start over somewhere that doesn't hurt. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and she saw him wrestling with the urge to fight, to argue, to beg her to stay. But he didn't. When do you start? He asked instead. I gave them 2 weeks' notice. I started Hartley on the 1st. He nodded slowly, and the professionalism that slid over his face was so complete it felt like a door slamming shut. Then I'll make sure you get a good recommendation, he said. You deserve every success. And that was it. The conversation that ended everything. The final 2 weeks were torture of a different kind. Iris trained her replacement, a competent woman named Sarah who would probably be excellent at the job. She wrapped up projects, organized files, created systems to ensure smooth transitions. And through it all, she and Damien maintained a careful, painful distance. They avoided being alone together. Their conversations stayed rigidly professional. But there were moments that cracked the facade. Times when their eyes would meet across the office, and the weight of everything unsaid would hang between them. Unfinished sentences that trailed off into loaded silence. The staff noticed. Office gossip swirled about what had happened between them, why the brilliant secretary was leaving, whether the rumors about the secretary and the boss might actually be true. Even the business suffered. Damien was distracted, making uncharacteristic errors in judgment, forgetting meetings, losing his legendary focus. Without Iris there to manage his chaos, he was falling apart in small, barely noticeable ways. Her last day arrived with the finality of an execution. Iris packed her desk, said goodbye to colleagues who'd become friends, accepted well wishes and promises to stay in touch. Damien had been in meetings all day, or so his calendar claimed. Part of her understood. Goodbyes were hard, and maybe it was easier this way. But another part of her, the part that had loved him quietly for 2 years, was devastated that he couldn't even manage a farewell. She found the envelope in the bottom drawer of her desk, tucked beneath the emergency chocolate she kept there. Inside was a severance package far more generous than policy required, a reference letter that would open doors anywhere in the city, and a handwritten note on his personal stationery. Thank you for saving me. I wish I'd been brave enough to save us. D. She read it 3 times, her vision blurring, and carefully folded it into her pocket before anyone could see. The elevator ride down felt surreal. Iris carried a small box of personal items, her future in one hand and her past in the other, and fought to keep tears from falling until she was safely out of the building. The elevator dinged at the ground floor, the doors began to slide open, and then she saw him. Damien was standing there, out of breath like he'd run down 20 flights of stairs, his tie askew, his hair disheveled, his eyes desperate. Wait, he said, and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button to close the doors. They were alone in the small space, and the air between them felt electric. I can't let you leave without telling you the truth, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I love you, Iris. I probably have for months, maybe longer. I was too blind and too stupid to see it, but I see it now. I see you, and I can't let you walk away without knowing that. Everything she'd ever wanted to hear. The words she dreamed of in her most secret moments, and they were happening now when it was too late. "Damien," she whispered, and her voice broke on his name. "I signed the contract this morning. I started Hartley on Monday. It's done. You know what's wild? Watching a confession scene this powerful and not subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller. That's actually unhinged behavior. Comment below if that's you. I need to understand the psychology. But subscribers already know there's still 2 chapters left, which means this isn't over." The weekend before Iris was supposed to start her new life at Hartley Consulting, she was in her small apartment packing boxes and trying to convince herself this was the right decision. The apartment was modest, nothing like the luxury Damien lived in, but it was hers. She'd earned every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves, every moment of independence. Starting fresh meant leaving behind the daily torture of loving someone she couldn't have, and that had to be worth something. She was wrapping coffee mugs in newspaper when someone knocked on her door. It was nearly 10 p.m. on a Saturday, and she wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, Damien Westfield was standing in her hallway, and he looked nothing like the composed billionaire she'd worked for. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes desperate and wild. "Don't go," he said before she could even speak. "Or if you have to go, let me come with you." Iris stared at him, utterly confused. "What are you talking about?" He stepped into her apartment without invitation, pacing her small living room like a caged animal. "I'll quit. I'll leave Westfield Industries. I'll work anywhere, do anything. I just need to be where you are." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You can't throw away your company for me," she said, her voice rising. "Your family's legacy, everything you've built, you can't just walk away from that." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "It's just a company, Iris. Buildings and money and stock prices. You're everything. You're the person who sees me, not my fortune or my name or what I can give you. You're the one who walked up that aisle when everyone else was content to watch me suffer. You're the one who's been saving me for 2 years, and I was too blind to notice." She wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to believe this was real and not just rebound emotion or gratitude or confusion. "You're not thinking clearly," she argued, wrapping her arms around herself protectively. "Vanessa just left you. You're hurt and you're looking for something stable, and I'm convenient because I'm here and I care about you. But that's not love, Damien. That's not enough." His response was to start listing moments, specific moments, with the kind of detail that made her walls begin to crumble. "You laugh at my terrible jokes, even when they're not funny, because you know I need the validation. You order my coffee differently in the afternoon because you notice I get jittery if I have too much caffeine late. You hum when you're concentrating on something difficult, this little unconscious melody that I started listening for because it meant you were happy. You remember everyone's birthdays, not just mine or my grandmother's, but the intern who started last month and the security guard on the night shift. You see people, really see them, and you make them feel valued. That's who you are. And I fell in love with who you are, not because you were convenient, but because you're extraordinary." The knock on the door startled them both, and when Iris opened it, Eleanor Westfield stood there with absolutely no shame about the fact that she'd clearly been eavesdropping. "Oh, good, you're both here," she said, walking in like she owned the place. "Iris, dear, stop being noble and let yourself be happy. Life is too short for this kind of nonsense." Damien turned to his grandmother with shock written across his face. "How did you even know I was here?" Eleanor smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she knew far more than she'd been letting on. "Because I've been orchestrating this from the beginning, darling. Why do you think I insisted you interview Iris personally? Why do you think I kept pushing you two together? I knew from the moment I met her that she was perfect for you. Someone who saw you, not your bank account. Someone with integrity and strength and a good heart." Damien's mouth fell open. "You knew? This whole time?" Eleanor settled herself on Iris's worn couch like it was a throne. "I knew you needed someone who would challenge you, who wouldn't be dazzled by the Westfield name. And I knew Iris was in love with you months before you figured it out. I also knew about Vanessa's deception, which is why I encouraged Iris to investigate. Sometimes the people we love need to learn their lessons the hard way." Iris felt tears threatening. "What if this ruins everything? What if we try and it doesn't work and I lose not just my feelings but my self-respect and my career and everything I've built? Damien crossed the room and took her hands. Then we'll have tried. We'll have been brave enough to take the chance. But not trying, watching you walk away and spending the rest of my life wondering what if, that's the real failure. He had a solution for the professional complications too. Come back to Westfield Industries as a partner, not an employee. Equal footing, equal power, equal voice in the company. We built something together. But Iris shook her head. I already accepted the Hartley position. I gave my word, and I don't break my word. And instead of arguing, instead of trying to buy his way out of the problem, Damien respected her choice. Then I'll wait, he said simply. However long it takes. 6 months, a year, whatever your contract requires. I'll prove this is real. I'll send you flowers every single day. I'll take you to dinner every weekend. I'll show you that this isn't convenience or rebound or confusion. This is love, and I'm not going anywhere. Iris broke first. She pulled him close and kissed him with 2 years of pent-up longing and fear and desperate hope, finally allowing herself to feel everything she'd been suppressing. They agreed she'd honor her 6-month contract at Hartley, that he'd court her properly during that time, that they'd build something real on a foundation of respect and equality. And as if the universe was offering its blessing, Iris's phone buzzed with a news alert. Vanessa Sterling and Julian Hargrove had been arrested on fraud charges, with 3 other victims coming forward with evidence of similar schemes. The scandal that had almost destroyed Damien became a story of triumph, of justice served, of a good man who dodged a bullet and found something real in the aftermath. We're 1 chapter away from the ending, and some of you still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller. At this point, it's performance art. Comment your reasoning. I'm genuinely fascinated. Everyone else who's already subscribed, let's see how this beautiful story wraps up. 6 months passed, and they were the most challenging and rewarding months of Iris Calloway's life. She thrived at Hartley Consulting, proving to herself and everyone else that her success at Westfield Industries hadn't been about proximity to Damien, but about her own competence and vision. She led major projects, earned the respect of colleagues who'd initially been skeptical about the woman from the wedding scandal, and built a reputation as a strategic thinker with exceptional people skills. But the real test was Damien keeping his promises. Every single morning, flowers arrived at her office. Not extravagant displays meant to show off wealth, but thoughtful arrangements that showed he was paying attention. Sunflowers because she'd once mentioned they reminded her of Ohio summers. Peonies because he'd noticed her lingering at a flower stand. Each bouquet came with a note, sometimes funny, sometimes sweet, always genuine. And every weekend, without fail, he took her to dinner. They went to hole-in-the-wall restaurants she chose, not just the 5-star establishments he was accustomed to. He learned about her world, met her sister when she visited the city, listened to her stories about difficult clients and office politics. He courted her like a man who understood he was earning something precious, not buying it. The relationship became public knowledge around month 3 when a photographer caught them kissing outside a Brooklyn coffee shop. But this time, the media narrative was different. The story wasn't scandal but romance. The billionaire who'd been humiliated at the altar had found real love with the woman who'd saved him. Opinion pieces talked about modern relationships, about finding partners who saw you as a person rather than a prize. It was still intrusive and annoying, but it was no longer cruel. And when Iris's 6-month contract with Hartley was approaching its end, Damien made her an offer that took her breath away. Not marriage, not yet, but something equally significant. Come back to Westfield Industries as co-CEO, he said over dinner at Eleanor's estate. Equal power, equal voice, equal stake in the company. We build something together, not as boss and employee, but as partners. We rewrite what a corporate leadership structure can look like. Iris considered the offer carefully, and this time her decision wasn't about obligation or fear or running away. This time she chose based on what she actually wanted. Yes, she said, but on my terms. We create a modern partnership with clear boundaries between professional and personal. We mentor other women coming up through the ranks. We change the culture from the top down. Damien agreed to everything, and when they announced the new leadership structure, the business world was shocked. Co-COS were rare, and a romantic couple sharing that level of power was almost unheard of. But the board approved it, partly because Eleanor used her considerable influence, and partly because the results were undeniable. Under Damien and Iris's combined leadership, Westfield Industries flourished. She brought the people's skills and strategic vision he sometimes lacked. He brought the financial acumen and industry connections she was still building. Together, they were formidable. One year after the failed wedding, they celebrated with a private dinner at Eleanor's estate. Just the three of them, reflecting on how a catastrophic moment had become the catalyst for genuine happiness. "Thank you for saving me that day," Damien said, raising his glass to Iris. "For walking up that aisle when you had every reason to let me suffer the consequences of my own blindness." Iris smiled and shook her head. "We saved each other," she said simply. "You gave me the courage to believe I deserved more than hiding in the shadows. I gave you a reason to see beyond the empire and remember you're human. That's what love does. It saves us from the smaller versions of ourselves." The future stretched ahead with promise, but no rush. There would be an engagement eventually, probably a wedding that would be private and intimate and nothing like the cathedral spectacle that never happened. But for now, they were building something real on a foundation of respect, equality, and genuine connection. They were changing the company culture, promoting talented people from within, mentoring the next generation of leaders. As for Vanessa Sterling and Julian Hargrove, justice had been served without Damien or Iris needing to lift a finger. Vanessa was serving a 3-year sentence for fraud, with civil suits from multiple victims, ensuring she'd never pull the scheme again. Julian had testified against her to reduce his own sentence, destroying any remnant of their partnership. It wasn't revenge. It was simply consequences. And in Eleanor's library, watching her grandson and the woman he loved work side by side on their plans for the company's future, the old woman smiled with deep satisfaction. The secretary who walked up that aisle didn't save just a billionaire. She saved a man who'd forgotten how to be human. And in doing so, she saved herself from a life of hiding in shadows. Some rescue stories have 2 heroes. And there it is, the complete story of how abandon became anointed, how humiliation became happiness, how a secretary became a CEO. Now here's the real question. If you made it all the way through this story without subscribing to Olivia the Storyteller, what is actually wrong with you? I mean that with love, but seriously, comment below and explain your psychological block. Is it commitment issues? Fear of good content? Let me know. But for everyone who did subscribe, thank you for being part of the storytelling family. You're the real MVPs. New stories drop 3 times a week, and I promise they just keep getting better. See you in the next one, and remember, sometimes the person who saves you is the one who's been there all along. You just have to open your eyes and see them.